Good afternoon, everyone. This is Pradeep, Ambassador of Change from GETI, the Global Education and Training Institute of Lucknow. And right now, you're on our disruptive education platform. On this platform, we have met with and interacted with more than 1,600 educators from India and all over the world. And this afternoon, we have for you Dr. Lakshmi Kumar. She is the founder and director of the Orchid School in Pune, in Maharashtra. She is a well-known educationist and intercultural coach. Her expertise spans establishing quality schools, building teams, developing educational processes, initiating best practices for schools and higher education. She is the founder director of the Orchid School, Pune. She has a bachelor's in home science, master's in social work, PG diploma in HR management, Cambridge International Diploma for Teachers and Trainers, and Educational Leadership. She has trained international assignees from the USA, Australia, UK, Sweden, China, Canada, and Japan. And she has won several awards. I'll mention just a few. Dynamic Woman of the Year 2005, that far back, and Honorary Directorate 2019, Social Work Humanities Department of Oribo University, Sweden, National Green Mentor Educator Award for Green Initiatives through Projects Learning 2019. Welcome, ma'am. Good evening. And she will be speaking to us on metacognition, of which she will explain a lot more herself. Thank you, ma'am, for being with us, and over to you.
Thank you, GETI, and thank you, Pradeep, for this great honor and including an important topic on metacognition. It's absolutely my privilege to be here with all of you. Thank you, audience, wherever you are. The context of metacognition is ever so relevant because we've been talking about one of the most important insights during COVID time is that of student ownership in learning or student agency. uh, the control that we had or the imaginary control that we had in the classroom all got completely dismantled when it went online. Students had the possibility to mute us and be a very passive learner, or probably just give an attendance and you don't know if the other person is even on the other side. And uh, and then of course the issue of lack of access to education itself was staring at us. As a result of 2.5 years of being online, we come back with a bunch of students who has huge gaps, and it often left the teachers wondering as to how did this happen, because we've been doing our teaching, we've been covering our syllabuses, our classes have been happening, and then where were the students and why did the learning not happen? While we could partly assign the reason for it as the digital mode and people were not prepared, I think a huge part of it is that lack of student ownership, or what we call the student agency. Hence, coming back post COVID, I think we need to keep the lessons of COVID times, and one of which is to build the student agency. So, in that sense, this topic is an extremely relevant and a very, very close to my heart. If you look at the image, this looks like just some kind of a fuzzy, uh, you know, dots of black ink, or more probably just spilt ink, and you really can't make a meaning out of this, or you can't make you can have different interpretations of what this is, and it could have many perspectives on it. And if I were to just give an outline to the same picture, and that uh, you know it kind of suddenly throws some kind of a clarity of the Dalmatian dog, you can see. And probably if you go back to it, now it suddenly emerges without even that guidance, or that there seems to be a Dalmatian dog and there seem to be a water body and some trees and plantations and a pathway. So so the same jumble did not make sense to us, could make a sense because there is some kind of a guided, some kind of a framework that got created. And that's pretty much what we want to look at metacognition from the point of view of the will and the skill. The will to basic, in kind of key element being the sense of ownership or volition, and metacognition or a will and skill. The first one is to skill to act, and in terms of this, the whole self-regulated learning, and then will to engage oneself in the learning. So this is the core, uh, you know, kind of processes, elements around which the metacognition gets woven around. So while all our cognitive spaces have four or more essential competencies, the first one we are all quite familiar with is the cognitive competency. The second one is what we are going to focus on, is the focus of how I learn. Hence, metacognition is about answering the how of it. And of course, the motivational, crucial question of why do I learn, or how is it going to make sense to me? Where am I going to apply this is an important element. And the most, underlying influencing factor is the social emotional competency of the learner. Is how do I relate to this? Do I have fun? Do I enjoy? Do I see this is going to connect some dots in my life? But the most important thing is also, okay, I know why I need to learn, I know how this is going to help, and also I have some previous knowledge. But is there a way, is there a method to learning how I learn? And that's the essence of metacognition. So our whole objective of introducing or giving a big focus to, in the classroom to metacognition, is for our students to take ownership. And it doesn't mean all students all time are being very attentive and being engaged and enrolled in what they are learning. But the idea that the learning happens only with my will and my skill is the ownership that we need to talk about. And also very important is, especially as they grow, to become more self-directed, moving from the spoon feeding and constant follow-up to follow-up actions, to knowing that what's next and what I need to act on. So the self-regulation is very important. And while they're doing this, the element of reflection is so crucial, because this is also a future readiness skill, is to say that this is my task and that I need to take complete responsibility. I need to understand and ask questions as to why I do it and how I do it. And also, I need to negotiate the assessment method, not necessarily the answer key and the question paper, but how would I want to evaluate myself about whether I'm making progress? Because I need to know it for my own self, and that I'm not a closed loop, but that I have a opportunity to improve if I need to. So the four crucial elements in or steps in metacognition is that students take ownership, and they become self-directed, and they are capable of reflections, and that they can choose appropriate tools for some kind of an evaluation of their progress in learning. And where it starts is, when you enter a class, typically we start our lesson plan, our deliveries, or we probably start with a chapter or a concept or solving a problem. But if you can take a pause, and especially when you're introducing a new concept, to say, ask the students or encouraging them to examine their own current thinking. What do I already know about this topic that could guide my learning? This is an important acknowledgement that our students don't come to classroom empty-headed. They come from real life. They have some lived-in experiences, even if it looks like limited experience. which is interesting because today, with the digital access that our children have, their knowledge or their information, yeah, more appropriate word is their information access is enormous. So let's not undermine. So, very important to nudge our children to look at what do I know about this topic. And somewhere while our teaching is happening, is to give the students a practice in identifying what they call the mud puddles, is what was the most confusing to me about the material explored in class today. It could be something like, oh, I thought that, but now I realize this is something completely different. Or all along I believed this, and now I see that's nowhere connected to what the teacher is coming with. Or I think, this is where I researched and this is what the information gave, and that seemed to be contradicting what's going on in the classroom. And this is an important aspect in metacognition, because ability to identify the confusion in our learners mind by themselves is also a way of moving forward. The third one is very important, is the retrospect post assessments. Is that okay, now I know this is what it is, so how do I recognize the conceptual change? Can I let go my earlier ideas of what it was to be issue with gender and identity? But now I see this is a broad term and this is perspective that I need to change, and that is how my thinking is going to change. And the last one is to kind of make very short, very brief notes in the reflective journal, as to what my preparation for exam is and how am I going to work towards it, and how will I remember it, that, that from a confusion to the clarity, a confusion to embracing the concept. So these four steps, if we were to follow, I think what we are doing in metacognition is acknowledging the student's context, acknowledging the student's knowledge or information base, and acknowledging the student's world of his and her ideas, and guiding them to go through this path in their own pace and at their own will. And uh, and I think that's the way we develop the classroom culture, is to talk about what do you know. Let's say if we are talking about the geopolitical issues of Ukraine war, what is that they know about it, and what perspectives do they really talk about, and how is the geopolitical relationship that really influences the kind of neutrality or the sides that we take. And students do have a perspective. Or how is that Ukraine war affecting the economy of India, or how is that it's affecting the economy of Europe, or why is this NATO is getting reorganized. So giving this perspective of what they know, and that also to say, what is that they find very challenging in terms of the questions or in terms of the assignment and project. When a student can identify the challenges, I think the student actively seeks also clarity. And the challenges need not be only in terms of complexities, it could be also constructing questions. That, this is another way of flipping, that before I find the answer, can I also actually could be able to construct questions. And also help students to kind of create a sequentiality. Okay, this is what I where I start, and now I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to do that, and that this is how I'm going to create some kind of a linear model, or maybe a cyclic one, but there is some level of sequentiality that the student builds. uh, I like this concept of the study strategies that Stenger Hall had given us. Whether our students are cognitively passive, do they approach the studies in this way, or cognitively active study behaviors? Is that cognitively passive is, typically that's what a lot of students do, is that I previewed the reading before class. Okay, I came to class, I read the assigned text, and I highlighted what teacher asked me to do. It's pretty much instruction mode, or more like action mode. Whereas a cognitively active study behavior is that going beyond the text, that how does it work, and why does it work this way, or what kind of study questions that I must have, and how do I create a mind map or fit the facts in the bigger picture. And probably I also have a small self assessment of the key points to know and to evaluate where I am. If we can help our students traverse from the cognitively passive behavior in classroom to cognitively active study behaviors, which means the student is at the center of learning and not the teacher. And that's how students determine and articulate where they are, and if you can help your students uh, kind of evaluate where they are in the taxonomy for themselves, and which means we need to in our own ways introduce the taxonomy gradations or this hierarchy. Because if we can help a student move from the very simple facts and recall to be able to comprehend, but to be able to apply and analyze it, and if we can help them make judgments and eventually to synthesize and ask the student, and in this evaluation, in this whole assessment, or in this whole understanding, or in my presentation, this is the level where I have achieved in terms of taxonomy, and give them an aspirational goal as to where the student is capable of. So remember that taxonomy is not something that we need to hold on for ourselves. Taxonomy is something that we need to make our students familiar, and ask them to also evaluate their own growth. Uh, the core two dimensions, as I have spoken about, is the basic knowledge base and the basic regulation base, the base. And our focus largely is on the regulation, but I just want to quickly enumerate what the knowledge contains is the knowledge of persons, knowledge of the task, and knowledge of the strategies. And it's about self, others, and universal. But the most important focus in metacognition is on the regulation in terms of how do I plan it, how do I monitor myself, how do I control, evaluate myself, and what kind of control measures that I must have in my whole learning process. So you can imagine the complete ownership is about this. And for this, they need to have experience a modeled behavior, and which is what teachers can bring in the classroom. That does the teacher demonstrate planning? Does the teacher also monitor her own planning versus the implementation? And at the end of the day, does the teacher has a tool to evaluate what she has planned and how she has delivered, and if it's effective, and that if she can have a complete control over her own delivery processes and say, this is a way you can do it, this modeling is a very, very effective way of for them to learn from. Which is what I want to say, highlight on is the explicit teaching, is to focus on prior knowledge, introducing the new knowledge, and modeling the application of knowledge and skills, and opportunity for independent practice and reflection. Unfortunately, our classrooms are a lot about content delivery, copying from the board, and rarely a space for independent practice and reflection. And hence, metacognition strives towards helping students to plan, monitor, and evaluate. And another crucial component of or element of metacognition is developing rubrics. It's a great skill, I must tell you. uh, Hardly our teachers can barely build a rubric which is based on both tangible and intangible factors. But if we can help our students say, okay, I have written this essay, what should be four parameters on which I must evaluate? Should it be content, clarity, central idea, and is it making sense, and is there some kind of a reflective space? So you if we can help our students build the numeric rubrics along the lines of the SMART goals. And this is also another very important future readiness skill, because our students in their adult life as a labor workforce would often be invited to evaluate their own self-assessment. styles, the way they learn, and you cannot go with the idea of evaluating knowingly, or I feel that this is how it is. But if there is an evidence based, or if there is a rubric that can guide them, I think that's more of a, constructive, more of a scientific and data driven idea, which means, as I mentioned to you, that model the behavior, modeling of the thinking. And the last but not the least is the ability to use questions and to engage students and to mentor their progress. And the questions have to be not necessarily developed by you as a teacher, but asking each student to contribute two questions to this concept they have learned, so that they can actually be the the creator of questions, and what we call creating the question banks. And this is very exciting. I have seen students really enjoying. And if you were to tell them, okay, in this taxonomy level, can you create three questions, one that belongs to the lot and one that belongs to the hot? Can you imagine the internalization of the hierarchy of thinking? Hence, the learning objectives are very essential. And a lot of time, I see teachers trying to cut, paste, copy. But I think the learning goal always explains where the students need to reach. And it helps, of course, our teachers to plan the activities, because the goal or the learning objective really helps us transact it through very meaningful and appropriate activity, and what the teacher needs to do to understand. Very important in the metacognition is the bunch of questions that uh, we need to help students. And this could be actually in their notebook as some kind of a ready reckoner or a ready reference. Is this similar to a previous task? What do I want to achieve? What should I do first? So you're already helping them sequencing it, and you're already helping them with the goal setting. You're already helping them to kind of compare as to whether it's the same or different. And the next one is some kind of a mentoring and monitoring on their self. Is, am I on the right track? And what can I do differently, so that I bring in my creativity? If last time I've done Google research, can I do an interview method to gather some kind of opinion? And who can I ask for help? You're also identifying the resources from which, and the who need not be only a person. The resources can be data, or documents, library research, or maybe some kind of an opinion poll. And then to evaluate what worked well, what could I have done better, and can I really shift my focus to do things in the other way? Very, very important for us to know this. The last three questions are about self evaluation, and that's what we do after a lesson observation. For example, that rather than us giving the feedback of, oh, your lesson was good, which I don't believe is a word that we must even use. But if the teacher were to evaluate and say, what worked well, and what is that I would do the same if I were to repeat the same lesson, and what would I do differently if I were to be given the same chance to repeat the same lesson? And the teacher knows instinctively that she knew what she has worked with and what actually could have been different. And that's the same with students. And I know that many of my audience may be thinking that, where do we get the time and how do we do it? But if you can invest a little extra time in training our students for this way of thinking in early years, especially in the middle school, it becomes a part of their ecosystem of learning. And then you don't have to do it for every time. If this self-regulatory behavior happens, the situation that we faced online with COVID may have not happened, because there is the sense of autonomy and ownership and student agency that would have been in operation. Another way of also looking at the retrieval of practice challenge grid, because remember we talked about students need to build a way of evaluating. So this is an interesting grid that I came across, and I thought I should share it with you. It's about the distant recall, immediate recall, and something that really happened. So you can assign a point. For 1 point is for a question from the last session, and 4 points for long, long ago, so that our students don't come with this attitude that this was part of the portion in PT1, or in the adult education. I see in higher education, engineering students say, oh, that was part of the semester 1, because they don't realize that semester 1 knowledge is very, very important for semester 6. Nothing really goes out of syllabus and out of date. So I think this is a very interesting grade. And let me give you, when it is really done, let's say something about the coronary heart disease and a system, and how they have really worked it out by using the latest one, 2 weeks ago what was done, last month what was done, and way back. So you kind of mix the questions in that one assessment paper. So we are not talking about just about restricting ourselves to what happened, because we know that the question number 2 weeks ago has the greatest connection to question number 4 week of way back. That's, can you compare and contrast the parts of animal, plant, bacterial, and yeast cells? Or last month we did this part of, can you explain the cardiac cycle? And I thought this is a very nice way of helping students actually create this grid, so that in their revisions they can actually have a question from just now to question from long way back. And another important element of metacognition, as I had spoken about, the ownership, is also the ability for students to evaluate their own papers by providing the answer key blueprint. And I love it because the answer key blueprint gives them a framework of what a point of reference for how they need to evaluate. And that is what actually oftentimes happens in the board exams. The teachers actually, the evaluators sit with answer key. So this is a way of providing them the reference point for their own evaluation. So the teacher presents a worked example and explains each step. And the student can use worked examples during independent practice and review and embed new knowledge. And if you are technologically savvy, and if your students are quite technologically aligned, use QR code as an opportunity for students to independently revise or further develop their skills. And what a better way than to also use the digital nativity to a better usage. The most important thing about metacognition is also it's a collaborative and a team learning. It involves students actively participating in negotiating roles and responsibilities and outcomes. So, this is also as akin to real life and work life, where you really don't work in silos and you work as just as an independent person. Even if you're an independent consultant, you're always working with people. Hence, students can learn to work in small groups, and everyone participates in the learning task. Uh, the another crucial component is to build questions. If a student is able to develop questions, that means the student is obviously functioning at a higher cognitive level. So encourage questions, or encourage students developing questions, encourage students to build questions that are open ended, and also to seek alternate point of view. And also effective question gives an immediate feedback that the student has understood, and the questions need not come from the teacher. So you can have a class divided, and after you've finished this concept, that you ask one side to build develop questions, or ask questions the other side answers, and vice versa. So you can creatively use the classroom with, and students actually drive this process of evaluation and questioning. And the last and most important is your feedback. And the feedback also can be from a student to student, student to teacher, about their performance, especially related to the learning goals. That and not necessarily just a feedback in terms of the accuracy of just one answer. It also redirects and refocuses teacher, because the feedback then tells us whether the students has understood, comprehended, or whether we need to reteach and realign the goals. And it can also provide both formal and informal uh, feedback for us. So I think a complete metacognition oriented driven learning classrooms are about not leaving out any of that, but bringing back student at the center for ownership. So that's what I have for you all. And yes, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for that very, very important talk on how to teach in the classroom. Metacognition. Ma'am, could you briefly tell us about metacognition so that everybody understands the whole idea, especially teachers and students?
Sorry, you want me to say it again in terms of the very brief this?
Yeah, not the whole thing, but basically what metacognition is all about.
Is about learning to think and learning to learn.
Right, ma'am. So, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for being with us. And see you again uh, in a short while. And thank you, Lakshmi ma'am, for this very, very relevant talk on, they say, modern methods of teaching. Basically, this is what we should have been doing for years and years. So,
Yes.
good evening, goodbye, and see you again tomorrow. And thank you so much, ma'am, for your
Thank you.
time and for your thoughts.
Yeah. Thank